Hello, hopefully we are live and it is working. Not seeing it. I'm not signed in. There we are. We're all set. Yay. So today we're talking about podcasting and how important podcasting is to grow your brand and your business. Now, if you're thinking, okay, podcasting, yeah, it seems a little bit of a struggle, or why would I want to do that? I want to give you a couple little stats. One, this is a stat from last year, so I think it's even more increased. There's 504 million different podcasts. That is crazy numbers. And you don't have to think about it as, oh, I want to be on Joe Rogan. Not many of us are going to be on the Joe Rogan show by any means. No, I'd like to, but neither here nor there. It's actually more about finding the podcast where you are, where your audience is. The other thing you have to know about podcasting is that 68% of people are saying that they purchased or considered purchasing after hearing somebody on a podcast. That's huge. So podcasting can really give you brand authority and you can reach more people. And it's not a matter of starting your own podcast if you've thought about, yeah, that'd be nice, but I don't have the time to do that. It's more about how can I use other people's audiences and be on their podcast. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so we're going to talk about one, that power and how to share your brand on podcasts, why it's important, and also how to get on podcasts. What is that process that you go through to be on a podcast? Back up in the end of, it actually was like August or September of 2023, I ended up coming across a woman on one of the podcasts I listen to. And I asked, how many of you do you listen to podcasts? And how many do you listen to a week? I can tell you from my own, I listen to podcasts a lot. And now a lot of podcasts are not just podcast audio, but they're also adding that video component to that. And I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get my thing to work correctly. There we go. Okay, and so podcast. Anyway, so I met this woman. I ended up reaching out to her and talking to her. And she helps help people, brands, people, influencers get on podcasts. That's her whole business model. And I signed up for it because I had no idea where to start. Fast forward a year, I was like, well, that was kind of dumb in one way because it's not hard. It really isn't hard. I didn't need to pay her all this money to do that. But with that said, it was kind of nice because it introduced me to that world. She does a lot of training. She does a lot of good things to help her not members, but her clients. And so if this is something that you're like, yeah, I want to be on podcasts, but I don't necessarily want to put the work into it, then she's definitely that person that you want to make sure you talk to. So with that said, let's talk about this. So I already told you that there are tons of podcasts and you're not looking for major podcasts. You're not looking for the big guys. And I just saw that Mel Robbins was #1 on Apple or Spotify, one of them. Joe Rogan is #2. You're not looking for those podcasts. You're looking for podcasts that really focus on your audience. I just realized my microphone's kind of far off, so I'm going to move it a little bit closer. Hopefully that'll help. So you're looking for podcasts that are closer to home. You're looking for micro podcasts. What are those podcasts that are actually talking to your audience? Now, you might be thinking, well, here's this business coach, and I'm a business coach. And so I don't want to, they're not going to want to have me on as a competitor. No, that's not the deal at all. I've been on a lot of podcasts that could be explained as a competitor. It's more of adding value. And the truth of the matter is somebody is going to listen and purchase you versus the other person or vice versa because of you and something you said. We don't all do it the same. You have competitors, but we all do it a little bit differently. And so it's important to understand that, yeah, you can actually get on podcasts that are related to your direct field. But you're going to start looking for podcasts that actually talk to your client, that's right for your brand. You're going to identify those. So the best places to start looking is one, do some searching on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. You want to put in key terms like entrepreneur. I used one the other day, entrepreneur plus AI, or entrepreneur, small business designers, whatever that is, whatever your core audience is, and you'll get a laundry list of tons of podcasts out there. So you want to look for podcasts that have been around, that have at least, look for podcasts that are 100 episodes or more into it. I've been on a few that were under that, but that is kind of an ideal for these micro. You might find somebody's had 300 in some. I was on a podcast one. It was one of the earlier podcasts I was on. And if you're familiar with Dave Ramsey, no, I wasn't on his podcast. But if you're familiar with Dave Ramsey, he has personalities within his Ramsey Solutions. And one of them had been interviewed on this podcast before me. It was a recent thing. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be on the same podcast as him thinking, you can't think that way. That was a dumb way of thinking. And I knew it was dumb at the time, but it was a little bit overwhelming going, okay, this is a really good podcast. I'm really excited to be on this one. So you're going to look through and you're going to do some research. Another thing that you can do is, ask AI. Go into chat and say, hey, give me podcasts in these areas and see what it comes back with. It may give you some good results. It may not, but it's at least a good starting point. Another option is there are services called Podmatch FM and Podcaster FM. And those are services where you can sign up and you can be either a guest or a host or both. And you basically create a profile, you put in there what you're an expert at talking about, and you can actually reach out to podcasters through that. It's not very much a month. I think it's like $35 or $36 on Podmatch. I don't know what Podcaster is, but it's not really all that expensive. And you can be proactive and find them there. You can also do a simple Google search. You might also find ones on either at events that you're going to, you're talking to someone and they just casually mention that they have a podcast. Talk to them about it. See if you might be a good fit to be on that podcast. The other idea I have for you is podcasts you listen to, of course. Oh, Facebook and LinkedIn. I have found that LinkedIn is a really good resource for finding podcasts as well. So now that you've identified your target audience, you've identified, yeah, I want to talk to this audience. I have an entire list of podcasts that I would like to possibly be a guest of. What's next? Well, first of all, you're going to develop what are the topics that you really want to talk about, that you're an expert in, that you can bring value. The number one thing you have to remember when you're on somebody else's podcast is your job is to add value for their listeners and make that host look good. That is number one. This is about them. It's their show. You're piggybacking on their audience, so you have to respect that. And so you want to bring topics that they have not talked about or you have a different view of. So you're going to look through those podcasts, say, okay, what are some of the topics that I can talk about that maybe they haven't talked about or they've had a different twist on or they haven't talked about in a long time. You're going to create that list. You're also going to create your bio. Why should somebody have you on their podcast? So what value do you bring? You're taking all this information and you're going to put it into what I call one sheet. And if you need help with this, this is, we're experts at it. We can definitely help you with creating this and identifying the podcasts. Absolutely. But you're going to create one sheet, and this is going to be your media sheet. This is going to tell a podcaster everything. It's going to have a professional picture of you. You're going to, that truly a professional photographed picture. It's going to have the bio of you. It's going to have a list of topics that you talk about. You can also add questions if you want to add questions of, hey, these are the questions the host can ask me during the podcast. And then you want your contact information, including all of your social channels. Now, when you're on this podcast or when you're pitching the podcast, you want to sell yourself. You're going to sell yourself and why you're an expert in this particular field. And you want to bring value. So be prepared that what you're talking about is, whether it be storytelling, there has to be a lesson for someone to learn that they capture, that they're inspired by. There has to be pulling them into your story and having them want to know more about you. And it's all about how you can make that connection with that audience. Now, once you have your one sheet, you've identified the podcast you want to go after. Now it's time to start pitching. So you're going to create a pitch letter. Now, my recommendations before you send a pitch is at least, at a minimum, listen to at least 1 or 2 episodes of that podcast. Learn a little bit about the host. Think about, okay, what do they typically talk about? What's their kind of twist on their podcast? Some podcasters will have a form on their website. I know for our podcast that we're just launching on March 3rd, we've created a form so if people want to be a guest, they can apply. If they don't have a form, you can use LinkedIn. I tracked a podcaster down the other day that was a fairly new podcaster on LinkedIn. Sent her a message, said, hey, I was listening to your podcast. I wanted to connect with you. It would be great to learn more about you. And then from there, once she connects with you, you can say, hey, I'm a podcast guester. I think that your audience might benefit from this. Are you open to discussions or do you take guests? You want to also, when you're doing that research in the podcast, make sure that they do interviews. Not all podcasts are interview oriented. Some are solo podcast. Like they do the solo, just them talking versus actually interviewing people. So with your pitch letter that you're going to develop, you can pitch through social. You can pitch by sending them an email if you can find their email address. You can call them with your pitch, and you can fill out the form. So there's different ways that you can actually pitch that. But in that pitch, you want to say, hey, I like your podcast and I listened to such and such episode and I thought it was great information. And I think this topic might be relevant for your audience, and this is what we could talk about. Now, sometimes the forms that they give you, I had a form yesterday that I filled out for a podcaster, and it was asking me, why do you think that you'd be a good fit for my audience? And, in honesty, I could have given it some canned response, but I told her exactly why I thought it would be a good audience and why the information would be relevant for her. And so you have to make it about them for that pitch and to, again, bring value. Okay, so once you get the pitch and say you get accepted, there are 2 things that can happen. Either one, someone wants to do a pre-meeting. That's usually about a 15, 20-minute get-together over Zoom where you're just kind of chit-chatting and, kind of talking through what that's going to be. Some podcasters go as far as really getting into the nitty-gritty of, okay, what's that outline look like? What are we going to talk about? What are those points you're going to bring to the table? Where other ones, they just do 15 minutes before the actual interview to kind of get to know you. I've had podcasters do excessive research, watch my videos. I had one guy watch a video and ask me a question about a video, and I had published this video maybe 2 years before. And so all of a sudden, I had to remember what was in that video. Now, I remember a lot, but when you do a lot of videos and a lot of content, it's like, okay, what did I say in that? And he was asking me questions about it. And it was awesome that he had that knowledge and that he actually did the research on me, but I had to use my brain and go, okay, what did I say in that video? I couldn't remember. Oh, it was fine though. It worked out great. I had another podcaster that actually, I mean, he wanted a full outline of what we were going to talk about, how that hit the audience, what that meant for the audience, and it was great. And it was a really good experience. It was very detailed and targeted. I've had other podcasters send me pre-questions. I've had other ones just go by the fly and see where the conversation goes. So you get a whole thing. The one thing I did learn a lot from podcasting is, and in creating my own podcast, is how organized or not organized people are. It's really funny. You either get those podcasters that have everything organized and give you all the details, or you have the ones that are just kind of, we'll just go with it. But it is kind of funny to watch. So you've made the pitch. Now you're on the podcast. You've got a date set up. Remember, you're going to want to make sure you have a good microphone, a good camera. Always ask, hey, are you recording this camera for video? Will you be putting this out on YouTube? Or are you just doing audio? It's just good to know. So I use a Shure mic, which you can kind of see. Yay. And I love this thing. This is a really good mic. It was worth the money. I think it was $250, $300. But I love my mic. I also invested in a nicer camera than what was on my computer laptop. I use a Logitech 4K, and I just wanted something a little bit nicer. So some people will put headphones on and want you to use headphones. I kind of find the headphones they're more distracting to me. I have these tiny little ears, see, and they fall out. And so then I get overwhelmed and get all worried about the headphones. So I don't see a problem, and I haven't had any problems with anybody saying, okay, the voice is this, or we're getting a lot of noise. Also, make sure that you're recording in more of a quiet space. Now, my office is set up because I do so many videos with a lot of noise dampening, which is really important. You want to keep everybody quiet, but as you know at the beginning of this video, my dogs are walking around. Some podcasters are awesome about, no, my dog might bark. It's part of it. We edit it out. Or it's just part of life. So many people now work from home, their dogs being a part of it, or they work in a place that dogs are allowed. That's kind of part of it. Now for me, in my office, I have a on-air light that I show through my doors so that my family knows, or mostly my son, well, actually my husband too, so they don't just barge in on them. So you want to have that quiet environment. You want to be really focused. You want to turn off everything else within your computer so that you can just really focus on this. So you're going to have that interview with them. Now, next is what you're going to do after that interview. This is the most important thing in making these podcasts work for your brand. All that other stuff was all great. It absolutely was, because now you have media to be able to promote out. But this is when you turn the podcast into business opportunities. Now, I have received leads from podcasts where people searched for me. But to really elevate your brand, you want to promote those podcasts. And some podcasters kind of require you to. It tells you exactly what they expect from you. So this is what you're going to do. So when the podcast goes live, typically the podcaster will let you know, and they will send you a link to the podcast episode. Some will give you artwork and some won't give you artwork. So you want to create that artwork if they don't give it to you. But you are going to share that across all your channels. You're going to share it on social, every social channel you have. It doesn't mean you have to do it that day. You just have to build it within your calendar. You're going to share it within, if you do email newsletters, you want to make sure you're sharing it there. You can actually take the content. I've taken the content and we put it in Descript. Descript is a software that can translate, or not translate, but transcribe what I talked about. And so I've used that content and any relevant content to build blogs and say, hey, if you want to hear an interview, and have a link to it.
I've also used that content to create other videos. We've also cut up sound bites out of it and figured out how to reuse it. You can promote a podcast that you're on for months. Now, this is a twofold. One, it gives you authority. It shows that you know what you're talking about and it elevates your brand. But you are also helping out that podcaster. You're also helping them spread the word out. And that's a really good thing. So think of it as a collaboration with that podcaster of getting that message out and helping promote them as well as helping promote you as an authority within your field. Okay, so today we have talked about one, how to do the research. You want to research podcasts. Look for micro podcasts. Don't stress about being on the big guys. Look for the ones that are actually talking to your audience. Two, you're going to develop a pitch and a one sheet. So your one sheet explains who you are, the topics that you talk about, and your picture. You need a professional headshot for this because a lot of times all the forums and everyone that I have talked to, they always ask for a professional headshot. So you're going to do your pitch. Then you're going to find how to pitch them. You're going to find them on LinkedIn. You're going to find them on the website. You're going to find some way to connect with them, either through Instagram or Facebook or whatever you're on. You're going to find a way to connect with them and pitch them. Now, one, make sure you're giving them a compliment and make it sound like you've actually listened to their podcast. Just don't do this cold. It's kind of rude. Learn a little bit about them. Okay, then we talked about the interview. Now, a couple things in the interview. You want to make sure you have an offer. It's something I forgot to talk about. You want to offer. You want some way for them to connect with you. If you give them a special code, that's a great way to track how people found you. And so if you want to make a special code or a special landing page, you can. Most podcasters will add your offer, add your website, how to connect with you in the show notes. So that is really important. You want to take opportunity. Now remember, just because you're on a podcast this week doesn't mean in 9 months from now you're not going to get a lead from there. Because what happens with podcasts, it has a really long shelf life. A lot of times when someone finds a podcast, they'll go back and watch older episodes, especially around topics that interest them. So just because maybe it doesn't get as much visibility immediately, it could also continue to be visibility for you even when you're not working. And so that's important to remember. All right, so you're going to pitch them. You're going to be on the show. You're going to give 3 to 4 key points within your discussion. You're going to answer the questions. Make sure you're a storyteller. Make sure you're engaging them. Making sure it's conversational. It's another thing. I've been on some podcasts where they just ask me questions and I just answer them. I don't enjoy those as well. I really like the ones where we have conversations. Then once the podcast recording is done, it goes live. That's when the work really starts. You have got to start promoting it, showing that you're on there. You can also add that to your website. The bottom of our homepage, you can see all the podcasts that I have been on. In the last year, I think I was in over 20 podcasts. This year, I would really like to double that. And so it is a really good opportunity to reach more people, especially today when social media is so cluttered, when we're having a problem with emails getting blocked for no apparent reason. It is getting harder and harder to reach people. And so this is just another channel to add within your strategies and how you can really go out there. Now, I have a couple things for you. One, as I mentioned, the Hobby to Profitability, which is our podcast, will be launching on March 3rd. There'll be several episodes that go live on that day. So please go out and subscribe to that when that comes, and I'll remind you of that next week. And I'm sure there'll be stuff all over our social media. The other thing is I want you to join me next week, again live, 1 o'clock. And next week, we're going to delve into how lead magnets and email sequences drive revenue. This is a must watch. If you have a website and you're not attracting people to your email list, you don't have a lead magnet, but you know you should, because email lists by far are the best thing that you can do for your business from a marketing perspective. Why that is because social media algorithms change constantly. You might think, well, no, I have, 5,000 people following me on Instagram or Facebook. The problem is exactly what happened to me. Luckily, we had already done our email list, was that you get hacked and one day it's gone, all gone, your entire audience. Or the algorithm changes and all of a sudden, not as many people are seeing your messages and you're not reaching as many people. So it's really important that you build your own audience, that you build that foundation, that you can talk to the people that are following you. To do that, you have to bring them into your fold and give them something of value. It's sharing your knowledge in a lead magnet that can help them do something. Now, from that lead magnet, when you capture their information, you want to develop an email sequence. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. What does that email sequence look like? How do they get the lead magnet? Once they get that, what do you do next? A couple days later, what happens next? We're going to go step by step and look at how to make your email sequences work so that you are basically nurturing them along. Because when people come to your website, they are not necessarily ready to buy right now, but you want to nurture them until they are ready to buy and make sure that you are on top of mind. So join me next Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and we will be talking about lead magnets and email sequences. All right, now I didn't get a lot of questions. We are trying to enhance and get more people involved in our live. The nice thing we're seeing, in case you ever want to know, do lives work? We're seeing a lot of people do recordings afterwards or watching the recording afterwards. We also put it on our website after. And so we're getting a lot of visibility that way. But if you have a question and you're watching this on replay, reach out to me. I have no problem answering questions and just talking about how this particular marketing strategy might work within your business and your brand efforts. Okay? I really thank you for those who are watching and that join me. And I will see you next week.